From the blessings of song and beauty to the curse of a stolen voice, the concept of magic is an undercurrent in Disney animation. In the Disneyverse, magic is multifaceted and tends to have an equal capacity for good and evil. Throughout the years, Disney's produced an untold number of characters who wield magic to varying degrees and for different purposes. But how does Disney's mystical armada stack up against each other in terms of power? I'm Kyle with Wicked Binge, and today we're taking on Disney magic users from the weakest all the way to the most powerful. But first, if you really enjoy magic, today's sponsor has an abundance of it. Raid Shadow Legends, available on mobile and PC. When it comes to magic, you can't go wrong with high elves, with so many high elven champions to choose from such as Lysandra and the Royal Huntsman. And that's one of the cool things about Raid, the level of variety. For instance, the PvP arena battles really show off all the options available when it comes to your opponent's champions, and winning medals in the arena will allow you to upgrade your Great Hall and unlock global stat bonuses. And last month, Raid got its biggest update yet. The main event is the Doom Tower, a giant tower with 120 floors, a ton of secret challenge rooms, and a dozen bosses to go through. With this update, now really is the best time to start playing. In fact, the Raid team is giving away a bunch of free stuff, including a special champion that will help you get started in the tower. Bulwark, who's incredible in Clan Boss and will help you tear through bosses in the tower. But if you need more incentive to download, we're going to give you a huge head start in Raid. All you have to do is click the link in our description and you'll get your free Void Champion, an XP booster, 50 gems, some energy refills, and even an ancient shard as soon as you get in-game. Look at this guy you'll get for free. You'll find your extra rewards here in your inbox for the next 30 days only, so don't miss out. It's all that easy. Just click the link in the description to get started. Thank you, Raid, for sponsoring us today. I'll see you all in game. Let's get back to the video. As usual, we'll start at the very bottom with our least powerful and work our way up. Figuratively and literally, you can't get much lower than Morgana, who's currently frozen solid, but also conscious at the bottom of the sea. As the younger sister of Ursula the Sea Witch, Morgana is exceeded by her sister's legacy in every conceivable way, especially in the magical arts. While she has the standard villain powers like superhuman strength and teleportation, she is an unskilled potioner and relies on deceit to get what she wants in her debut, and only cinematic appearance to date, The Little Mermaid: Return to the Sea.
Stop criticizing me!
While she has the standard villain powers, Morgana's most significant magical feat is removing melodies and giving her a mermaid's tail, inverting Ursula's sleight of suction cup from the first film. But to do this, she requires trace amounts of Ursula's magic, not her own. Even her loyal sidekick frequently chides her for her lack of power in comparison to her sister, something that poor Morgana has apparently had to put up with since childhood if her deleted song, Gonna Get My Wish, is anything to go by.
I bet Ursula could have done it.
What?
Just slightly above, we find DrFacilier, the crooked conjurer of the Crescent City. Some people were pretty upset when Disney painted voodoo, a real religion, as the source of Facilier's dark magic. But as it turns out, that power wasn't even Facilier's to begin with. Indeed, the good doctor doesn't actually perform any magic under his own steam. As his theme song points out, it was all his friends on the other side. But Facilier does have one thing that keeps him from being a mere mortal, and that's his sapient shadow.
Bring him to me alive. I need his heart pumping.
We never really learn if this is a separate entity or a trick that Facilier does. We do see, however, how the shadow stays completely loyal to him even when all of his other magic turns on him. Of course, it deserves consideration for granting the Doctor heightened influence over his surroundings, but as we've mentioned, it is his only true magic, and it does nothing for him when his friends come along to collect. Our third weakest entrant may be lacking in skill, but pound for pound, he's the richest mouse to ever be, Mickey Mouse himself. The only incarnation of Mickey known to perform magic regularly is as the Sorcerer's Apprentice, the eponymous star of the scene from Fantasia. Here, Mickey is a young and inexperienced spellcaster who animates a series of household items to get out of doing his chores. He does so by donning his master's magical hat without permission. The image of Sorcerer Mickey has since become a staple for Disney. In fact, it was probably the most significant appearance Mickey had since Steamboat Willie. But Mickey's kinda useless in this role. He can't control the stolen magic and has to resort to physically destroying the items he animated. It falls to his master, Yen Sid, to save him. You might argue that this isn't really the only time we see our favorite mouse cast a spell, and you'd be right. But consider, even when Mickey is competent with magic, it's canon that he needs Yen Sid's hat to do it, as demonstrated by a trend that's formed among Mickey's opponents, simply knocking it off his head. It's hard to imagine that this adorable little oligarch would be a poor magician, but the jury is out on this one. Mickey and magic just don't mix. This brings us to Yzma, Kuzco's deposed advisor and longtime rival for the throne. It's common knowledge that Yzma, as well as the entirety of the Emperor's New Groove, underwent a total overhaul in character during production. Yzma in particular went from a threatening magical presence to a comedic one, and her skills were adjusted accordingly. In fact, it might be argued that she's more of a chemist, or at least an alchemist, since all of her feats are accomplished through the use of elixirs and treated as science.
Our moment of triumph approaches!
Whatever she is though, she falls into our weaker shades of gray because her magical exploits often fail. While it might be argued that her original plan to poison Kuzco only fails because of Kronk's incompetence, Yzma herself has a proclivity for hubris which often outmatches her wit and skill. Equally, her magic is lacking. She's limited to potions, and apparently only potions which turn folks into animals. And that doesn't really cut it when stacked up next to some of our later entrants, so we place her here. Then there's Snow White's evil queen. Consumed by envy and preoccupied with her own vanity, the queen relies on her servant, the magic mirror, to survey her competition, as well as deceit and disguises. And like Yzma, requires magic potions to get the job done. Unlike Yzma, however, there's no question that the queen is actually into the dark arts, and her scheme is executed more competently as a result.
Begin thy magic spell.
And even that's a bit of a reach, considering that she has to sacrifice her own beauty to con Snow White in the first place. Though, at least her transformation is well done. Snow White falls for it despite the warnings of, like, every other life form in the vicinity. But, ultimately, for all of her bluster and cape sweeping, the Queen's theatrics aren't backed by any real magical potency. That's not to say she's not scary as hell, just that she's not likely to hurt you if you're not dumb enough to take free food from a stranger. Our next entrant might surprise you, Cinderella's own fairy godmother. The fairy godmother only appears briefly in all three Cinderella movies. In the first, she works her wonders on an unsuspecting pumpkin and gives Cinderella her trademark ball gown. But as she informs Cinderella, this faint blessing she gives her after years of sitting back and watching her be horribly abused will be lost at midnight.
The stroke of 12, the spell will be broken.
So, while she can work her wonders on a pumpkin and Calvin Klein a dress out of nowhere, these things don't last for more than a few hours. And you can argue that Godmother's limits are just the limits of magic in general, but you'd be wrong. When the Godmother's wand falls into Tremaine's hands in one of the sequels, Godmother isn't only useless, she's also defenseless, insomuch that Anastasia is able to turn her to stone, quite literally without trying. What's more, Lady Tremaine is able to undo and reshape the very fabric of reality to her own will with the Godmother's power, and no stroke of 12 undoes this for her. So we're left to surmise that the Godmother is not only impotent without her wand, but that she's also the weakest person in the franchise to hold it, and we have to rank her accordingly. In the same vein, we have Moana's Maui, who channels the power of the gods through his magical fishhook. Much of his role is similar to our above entrants. Being a demigod, the powers at his disposal are not his. Uniquely though, Moana explores this by ultimately stripping him of his weapon, but not before showing us precisely what he can do with it. For example, Maui's transformative abilities are top-notch, and with his fishhook, he can even combat the Kakamora and the likes of Tika. Though you might argue that the Godmother's magic is further reaching, at least with Maui, we can see who he is without it. In true Disney fashion, that makes him pretty powerful in the end. And you know what? Why shouldn't it? After all, it's the size of the heart, right? Let's move on to our passable section. You wouldn't want to face these guys in a fight, but they're no major existential threat. Those will come a bit later. First is the Pied Piper, one of Disney's earlier cartoons and perhaps the most benign representation of the titular character to ever be put to air. Much like the original story, Piper uses his magical music to spirit a plague of rats away from a besieged town ruled by a greedy king. When the people refuse to pay him, he spirits away the town's children using the same power. And Disney does this thing where they try to make that not completely sinister by implying that all the children are abused anyway and that the Piper is doing them a favor. But all the creepiness aside, his potent pipe does earn Piper a spot on this list. And it's not a bad spot either, since he's one of the few characters on our list to employ his magic successfully and without some comedic exception. That's no small feat in a Disney piece. Then there's Santa, otherwise known as Sandy Claus. While you could argue that Halloween Town's general vibe of witches and demons implies widespread magic, we don't see much of it practiced in the timeless holiday classic The Nightmare Before Christmas. Jack and Dr. Finkelstein do meddle with the laws of nature in their respective experiments, but this pursuit is played out as more scientific.
You're mine, you know. I made you.
Even Oogie Boogie, a living colony of insects, appears to be rational in nature, insomuch as all of his trappings are mechanical. The only character to undeniably pull a rabbit from the metaphorical hat is Santa. He manages to right all the wrongs that well-intentioned but clueless Jack had wrought out of his holiday, which was no small accomplishment. He apparently traverses the globe and saves Christmas everywhere without trouble, and even finds time to bring snow to Halloween Town before departing. For his might though, Santa apparently requires his gadgets to do anything spectacular like the above example. You would think that the All-Father of Christmas wouldn't allow himself to be captured by 3 children or be tortured by a sentient beehive, but he does. So the exact level of Santa's magical power is questionable, but no doubt it's there. So we'll place him here, just shy of our average. Next, another Disney hallmark herself, Tinkerbell. Tink's abilities are expanded on in spin-off material, but the original Peter Pan implied that pixie dust was something that she created, so we'll count it. And via pixie dust, Tink gains access to some pretty choice magic, namely the ability to help others fly. Most exceptionally, the power extends to objects much larger than herself, namely Captain Hook's ship. As a fairy, she's also indestructible as long as someone's there to praise her and assure her that she's believed in. Seriously, in one scene she explodes herself and basically gets healed by being affirmed. All that's to say that Tinkerbell is small, but she's got the chops to sit at the big fairy's table where magic is concerned. All it takes is a little faith in herself, and there's gotta be a lesson in that somewhere. Our next entrant is the wizard Merlin, advisor to King Arthur in The Sword and the Stone. For being a Dumbledore level of spacey, Merlin is one of Disney's mightiest wizards. This makes sense since he's based on the most famous wizard in Western mythology. Disney's Merlin is mentor to young Arthur and uses his magic to protect him from his own curiosity and his rival, Madame Mim. In fact, it's during his fight with Mim that his power really shows. His MO is brains over bronze, and he warns Arthur at one point that magic won't solve all of his problems. He advises him instead to rely on cleverness, something he tends towards himself.
Knowledge and wisdom is the real power.
When Mim cheats in their duel, he has to resort to outsmarting her, but his magic is able to facilitate all his transformations, even his final one, which turns him into a virus. Unfortunately, his magic is powerful enough to literally shoot him out of England like a rocket if he asks, proving to us all that power can be a double-edged sword. Still, the guy gets a vacation of the ordeal, so you could call that one a wash. Then we have Rapunzel, noting that the animated series establishes that Rapunzel's power is not truly hers. She does utilize as a natural extension of herself, and the theatrical feature presents the Sundrop's magic as hers, and we count her on those grounds. And just going by the theatrical feature, Rapunzel does have some of the most powerful healing magic in the series. Rather than simply pulling someone back from the brink of death, she manages to reach into the void and cram Eugene's screaming soul back into his body with just a teardrop. That is pretty intense. And again, this is to say nothing of the animated spin-off, where her powers are decidedly more godlike, giving her the magic beams and light explosions befitting of a Disney protagonist. We also get to watch her hone and develop these abilities over the course of episodes, something that highlights the scope of the abilities in the final product. Moving on, we finally get to Ursula. It's an interesting bit of trivia that the Broadway version of The Little Mermaid established Ursula as Triton's sister and implied that she herself was once a mermaid. It further suggests that it was her continued practice of dark magic which gave her monstrous visage and mannerisms. Both of these tidbits are based on concepts which never made it into the final film, but they paint dark magic as a far more integral facet of Ursula's character than it ultimately was. That almost feels like a missed opportunity in hindsight, because though the movie doesn't go into it, Ursula appears to be an incredibly powerful sea witch. Over the course of the film, Ursula demonstrates exceptional skill and transmutation.
Have we got a deal?
She is remarkably able to give Ariel 2 functioning human legs and herself a fully functional human disguise. Unlike most sorcerers of her caliber, she doesn't appear to borrow her magic from some external MacGuffin. Everything she does, she accomplishes under her own power. There is the matter of the climax of the film where she draws power from the trident. But even then, it speaks to her might that she was able to wield the weapon so easily in the first place. Ursula's real power is in her ability to make a sail, of course, but credit where credit is due. She is no pushover in terms of magical prowess. You really have to pity any poor, unfortunate soul who goes up against her without a pirate ship to spare. So we've covered the weak and the not so weak. Now let's take a crack at the guys who are really something to write home about. If we consider the widespread theory that the Blue Fairy is also Evangeline, the Evening Star, and the gateway to Neverland, the Blue Fairy certainly places higher. But by her only canonical appearance in Pinocchio, she ranks here. Make no mistake, this lady's pretty potent to be so blue. She not only grants Pinocchio life, but also humanity, two things that, notably, no other Disney character has done in tandem.
You must learn to choose between right and wrong.
And the ethical implications of giving a puppet flesh and bones aside, that she does it is no small matter. Returning someone to life is one thing. Giving a block of wood a set of functioning organs is quite another. You definitely get the feeling that the fairy is one of those deities that can do anything but won't unless they deem it the right thing to do. Again, moral implications aside, she's a powerful spellcaster to say the very least. Certainly powerful to begin this section of our list. But again, moving aside the implications of giving a human brain to an object, that she can do it at all earns the Blue Fairy her placement here. And speaking of impossibly powerful deities treating mortals as their playthings, let's take a look at the Enchantress. Most agree that the Enchantress, regardless of the good her curse eventually did, she herself is at the best morally ambiguous. Without considering the age-old implication that she cursed the prince when he was 11, she also takes out his entire kingdom in one fell swoop, and nearly condemns them all to a disproportionately bleak eternity, and leaving grim prospects for the one saving grace. Nonetheless, this sorceress is more than mighty, considering the width and breadth of her curse. Not only does she successfully transform a castle of servants into a houseware and a man into a chimerical monstrosity, she also warps the entirety of his castle and could apparently keep his magic in place indefinitely.
They must fall in love tonight if we ever expect to be human again.
It would probably be more in line with the filmmaker's intentions to consider the Enchantress as less a character and more of a force of nature, but to have the chops to be a force of nature, we give her props, and a place on our list. The Enchantress herself is morally ambiguous, but her curse was a powerful one, insomuch that covered a very large expanse of land and affected vast numbers of people. She was also able and prepared to keep it up indefinitely if the prince failed to learn his lesson. These things demonstrate the Enchantress as one of Disney's most powerful unseen figures, and if you ask us, that's way better than the half characterization they gave her in the live action. They also gave her a magic book in this adaptation which she leaves with the prince. This adds to her ranking and even has roots in the original French story. Like most everything about the remake, nothing significant comes of this, but it is an interesting bit of trivia. Only a few more fairies, we promise. We present the three good fairies, Flora, Fauna, and Merryweather. For all intents and purposes, this trio is the collective protagonist of the Sleeping Beauty film, infighting and all. They behave as a single unit whose shared arc of protecting Princess Aurora is the most developed arc of the movie. And while a major facet of this arc is an abstinence from their magic, there are no pushovers when it comes to using it. In fact, while Flora and Fauna are convinced that their magic can only be used to spread happiness, the innovative Merryweather pushes their boundaries considerably by practicing magic combatively. And let's be real, they're the ones who fight Maleficent in the final battle. At best, Prince Philip is a conduit. It is another case of characters who require their wands to do anything. But it is also implied that this is a conscious limitation they place on themselves during their time as Aurora's guardians. So let's just not look this one in the mouth.
I just love happy endings.
Next up is a fan favorite, old blind voodoo lady who lives in a boat in a tree in the bayou, Mama Odie. Odie's style and cadence is very Christian coded. Her musical number is in the style of a gospel song, and her Greek chorus is reminiscent of a church choir. Nonetheless, they don't shy away from her as a sorceress, and a powerful one at that. Early development had Facilier on the docket as her son, who chose the dark arts while his mother stuck to the lighter half, and the two were set to do battle using the magic at Mardi Gras. Of course, this didn't come to fruition, presumably because it would have been too awesome, but she still has her moments. She can positively waste the shadow demons, transfigure her snake into whatever, and apparently answer the whims of anyone who can find her.
Dig a little deeper, you find everything you need.
While she is discerning and won't answer people's wishes if they're blind to what they need, it is implied that she could. It's also implied by the way that she can effortlessly summon her torch that her magic is actually hers, rather than given to her by an outside force. She is a great example of the principle, you're only as old as you feel. The film indicates she's as old as New Orleans itself by the time of the movie, and she's still kicking. Of course, we can't miss Elsa, the beloved elemental and former Queen of Arendelle. As a reincarnation of a powerful fifth element, Elsa's ice magic was originally treated as something to hide for the scope of the damage it could do. Even as a child, Elsa's magic was powerful enough to freeze an entire ballroom. As she grew, her power did as well, and a major arc for her in the first film was keeping it from hurting anyone.
You have to go.
No, I know we can figure this out.
To see why Elsa places so highly, one need only watch the Let It Go sequence, in which she builds a castle just by stomping on the ground a few times. She can also create life, apparently, if Olaf and her snowman bodyguard are anything to go by. She also demonstrates her power by beginning and ending a deep freeze of her kingdom, culminating in a blizzard. The sequel only adds to this, especially in the climax, when it falls to Elsa to keep Arendelle from literally being washed away. People remember Elsa for her gowns and style, and for Idina Menzel's incredible vocal performance, but she should also be known for being one of the most powerful wielders of magic whom Disney has ever created. So we rank her here. Then there's Maleficent. At the height of her might, Maleficent boasts that all the powers of hell are hers to command. And then she turns into a fire-breathing dragon nearly 50 feet high. Just in the climax alone, she becomes a firework, grows a briar forest, and commands the might of a storm to keep Philip away from Aurora's side.
Now shall you deal with me, O Prince.
It's safe to say Maleficent is one of Disney's most powerful figures, especially noteworthy in how the good fairies admit that they aren't powerful enough to stop her. They eventually take her out with the metal spike, but I mean, who wouldn't that kill? Even her curse can't be lifted by the fairies' gifts. It can only be mitigated so that the girl doesn't straight up die when she touches the spindle.
Maleficent's powers are far too great.
To be as evil as she is, Maleficent has the power to back it up. We've seen in all the spin-off material that includes her, she's no pushover as a fairy. In fact, she's Disney's only take on an evil fairy godmother, a trope that they helped to popularize. In one House of Mouse bit, Satan watches her transformation and admiringly says, "I love your work." We ask you, is there any higher praise than that? Next are the spirits of Christmas past, present, and yet to come. Considering these guys are very much the intellectual property of Charles Dickens, we'll judge them based on Disney's interpretation in their 2009 adaptation of A Christmas Carol. This film's unique aesthetic was beneficial to the depiction of the infamous spirits. To let the animators flex a bit, the movie included bits from the book that would have been impossible to stage otherwise, such as Christmas past being a candle and Christmas present flying them around in Scrooge's disembodied drawing room.
You have never seen the likes of me before.
Collectively, these guys make it clear that they exist in the quasi-dream world that they let Scrooge through, but that they can also influence events which happen in the real world. In either reality, however, their skills are praiseworthy. Scrooge himself comments, they can do anything they like, of course they can. It's lucky that whatever greater reality they belong to, though, is concerned with spreading Christmas cheer and not enslaving the human race or something awful. It's probably not a stretch to say that we wouldn't stand much of a chance, but all three pale in the face of our next spirit. Of course, we mean Chernabog, the demon of Bald Mountain. Chernabog is perhaps the most evil Disney villain, not for his goals or general demeanor, but rather for simply being the embodiment of all darkness. Chernabog is the god of the wicked souls and the king of demons. His mere presence recalls the damned from hell and criminals back through the noose. Top that off with Disney's most metal animation sequence to date, and you're left with a pretty solid bad guy. You also have his legion of loyal servants to consider, as well as his ability to shoot columns of fire out of Earth itself. Indeed, Chernabog is a force to be reckoned with, so long as it is nighttime. Actually, this weakness is so great that it keeps him from placing any higher, because for all the demon's power, he only gets one night a year for it. In keeping with the European folklore that this sequence is based off of, Chernabog can only work his wonders on Walpurgis Night, which only comes around once annually. Thus, our man spends 364 days a year as a mountain, and that leaves him in the pixie dust in the face of our other entrants, such as Genie. We all know how the Genie of Aladdin boasts phenomenal cosmic powers in exchange for an itty-bitty living space. We've seen what those cosmic powers entail as well. To say nothing of the nigh omnipotence Genie must possess to pull off the visual gags that he does, he can also defy any and all logic to grant his master's wishes.
How about it? What is it you want most?
In Al's case, this extended to transmutation, teleportation, and conjuring a whole caravan and menagerie out of nowhere. But of course, he's also bound by that pesky, it must be wished for rule and his three famous limitations. And these almost cost Al his life. Luckily, through sheer panicking, Genie is able to avert that. But you would think that once Genie was freed from his lamp, his power would be unmatchable. The thing is, it isn't. Because Genie was freed from his lamp, he took a pay cut in terms of power. In the 2 sequels and the spin-off TV series, Genie is still able to use reality as his props department, but he's occasionally unable to undo some of his spells, and he's even outdone by our next entrant. That's right, next is Jafar. Jafar was already pretty powerful in the first film. His use of magic to help move his political ambitions along quickly establishes him as a threat. But the real kicker comes at the end of the first film, when he goes from all-powerful sorcerer to all-powerful genie. What's more, as a bound genie, Jafar's power outstrips that of Al's genie per his sequel villain musical number. In fact, Jafar is most threatening in the second movie, in which he gets a musical number boasting about how, as a proper genie, he bests our genie. And his placement really is that simple. Genie is among our most powerful entrants, and by technicality, Jafar one-ups him in terms of the feats he can accomplish. Still, Jafar never manages to free himself from his lamp, and that leads to consequences when said lamp takes an unexpected bath in some wayward lava. Finally, our bronze medal of Disney magic goes to Fiti. While she's undoubtedly the most powerful figure in Moana's mythos, based on indigenous Samoan cosmology, it can't quite be said for Fiti that she's the most powerful magic user in the Disneyverse. Still, through the power of her detachable heart, she is imbued with the power of creation and restoration, and you can tell that the artists really had a good time showing her make everything pretty again life-giving, but her power actually extends beyond that, even without her heart, because once it's removed, Fiti doesn't just wither and die like it's said that she does. She rises again as Tika, a violent entity with dominion over earth and fire. In this form, she's capable of Olympian-level destruction, calling down the punishment of the natural world on any who cross her. Not only this, Tika also has the power to recall the life she gave as Fiti, which nearly condemns Moana's home and eventually the entire known world to destruction. While she never utters a word of dialogue, Fiti is quite the goddess, one who you definitely don't want to make mad, seriously. Now, the silver medal of Disney magic goes to the gods of Olympus. While it's true that this 12-fold pantheon is not one singular character, we rank them all as one because it is established by the Hercules canon that these gods are evenly matched among themselves. As such, they constitute the very apex of magical talent in the organized universe. They're so powerful that their magic both sustains and alters the physics of the mortal world. You really do end up wishing they got more of a chance to shine in the original movie, where they're admittedly pretty useless, with the exception of Hades, of course.
I'm the one giving orders now, Bolt Boy.
It's the animated series where they really shine, but even they were no match for our gold standard. However, before we reach our finale, our gold medal for most powerful Disney magic user, let's take a quick moment to appreciate a few honorable mentions, all of whom have proven themselves as magically magnificent, but don't quite make our list on various technicalities. We'll start by recognizing Vanellope von Schweetz. You might argue that it's technically not magic since the video game world doesn't have to obey our natural conventions. But in her own right, Vanellope does successfully disrupt the fabric of her reality through her unique abilities as a glitch. And like conventional magic, this is a skill that comes naturally to her, but must be honed to be useful. And her power is pretty great, too. She also appears to have the implicit power of restoration, seeing as she both undoes Turbo's disguise and revitalizes her world after the Cybug invasion. But it's a bit of a stretch, or at least too long of a discussion, to call her glitching abilities a mystical art. We can't place her on the list in good faith, but she at least deserves a shout out here. The second honorable mention goes to the witch from Brave. It's important to note that Brave is Pixar, something that the other Disney princesses consider when they mention Merida. We don't count the witch for that reason alone. Still, what a witch, right? To be one of Pixar's few magical characters, the witch is no Ursula. She doesn't deceive and she has no ill intentions, but that still doesn't stop her magic from making a mess of things.
What was that thing about the spell?
Even so, the blame for that one falls on Merida. The witch's magic is mostly rooted in transformation, both in a literal and metaphorical sense. Provided she's not away at a festival, we definitely know who to go to if we ever need to turn someone's mom into a bear. And our last honorable mention goes to Ian from Onward. He's Pixar's first earnest attempt at a high fantasy protagonist, and it shows in just how human Ian ultimately feels. Much like the world around him has abandoned magic for safer and more predictable alternatives, he too has transitioned to a more conventional way of living. Contrasted with his older brother, Ian just wants to be seen as normal. So of course, it ends up being him who's forced to wield the magic staff on the cross-country road trip he takes with his father's disembodied legs. But to be a novice, Ian does a good job using it throughout the movie. He also manages to restore magic to its original glory in his homeland, which earns him brownie points as well. But finally, we have the most powerful magic-wielding entity in the Disneyverse. Well, once again, entities, plural, the Titan. In Greek mythology, the deposition of the Titans by the Olympians symbolized order coming from chaos. Hercules establishes this in a far more literal sense by casting the Titans as single-minded and destructive.
Destroy him!
Good answer.
But the Titans do possess the most significant power in Disney animation. Just in the brief moment they're allowed to roam the earth freely. They absolutely demolish the countryside, and that's before they take the fight to Olympus, where they make quick work of the gods themselves. It's a philosophical discussion as to the winner in the eternal battle of creation versus consumption, but when push comes to shove, Zeus is unable to pull a rabbit from the cosmic hat twice, and the Titans are able to subdue him. So how are our ultimate magic users brought to their knees? By a mere mortal, and through brute strength. Make of that what you will. But what do you think? Who are the most powerful Disney magic wielder? Let us know in the comment section below. And make sure to hit that notification bell and binge our Good to Evil playlist. And support the channel by downloading Raid Shadow Legends by using the links in the description. Most importantly, stay wicked.